Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Michael Hudson, who's managing director of Southern Cross Gold, who are a junior miner exploring for gold and antimony in the Victorian Goldfields and working on their 100% owned flagship project, Sunday Creek, which is one of the best known grassroots discoveries in Australia with a globally leading high grade hit rate for the stage of the project's development. Michael is a professional geologist, explorationist and entrepreneur with over 30 years experience in exploration, project development and management in Australia and internationally. Apart from being the managing director of Southern Cross, he's also the founder of Mawson Gold and Hannah Metals. So has a strong pedigree in start-up mining companies, as obviously his career, during his career. Today we're going to discuss obviously the journey of Southern Cross and their flagship Sunday Creek project. Also talk about the community relations work they've been doing and a lot more. Michael, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
G'day from down under, Rob. Lovely to join you.
Yeah, appreciate your time as well. So as we always start these podcasts off, I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career. As I mentioned, you've been in the industry for a long time. You're an entrepreneur. Obviously started in geology. So I just wonder if you can just run us through your career and how it progressed.
I'll do it in a nutshell. When you start talking about 30 years and I see myself in front of it, I don't feel like it, but it's gone quickly. So I was country born, so sort of always loved being out there, getting in the field, shooting, riding motorbikes, and I think even if you look behind me, there you could just see there's a metal detector behind me, and that's really how my love for geology started. And I'm sure we'll come back to it, but I was sixth generation from a little country town, the oldest inland town in Victoria, because it was one day stagecoach ride from Melbourne to this town called Kilmore for the digger, not the diggers, the literally the diggers who went to the goldfields. So it was founded as a supply town for the goldfield rush in the 1800s, and my family started there at that time. So there was gold around there, and actually Southern Cross is now based in that town, where so it's the prodigal son returns, because I've basically spent 25 years of my life outside of Australia and came back during COVID. So country born, this little town, prospected and had metal detectors and panned for gold and other things, and then went to university at the University of Melbourne and took an extra subject because I had this love of geology, but I never thought I was going to be a geologist. I just did it because I couldn't work out what else to do. And then I thought, this is pretty cool, and you can do it. It's a job that you can do. And anyhow, had no idea. I went to a very academic university that didn't really teach me much about the modern world, but I got a job underground in a very famous area in Australia called Broken Hill, which was built BHP, Broken Hill Proprietary. So Australia's and the biggest mining company in the world came out of that town in 1887. Formed by 5 people, and that's the story of that. So a great love of history of mining came from being in that town underground. Learnt the ropes, learnt that geology was you're not the most important person, probably the least important person in a mine in many respects, and got the school of hard knocks with lots of rough and tumble miners, and then I got sent into exploration after my 4th year and wandered around Australia, and then got sent overseas and really didn't. This is like 96, and didn't return to Australia. I lived here. My wife had a base here with our kids, but I got on a plane for the most part of those 20 plus years. And so it was Pakistan, South America. I lived in South America for 4 years actually. And, I loved Peru and became a little bit Latino and speak the language. And then So it was 10 years total with a major mining company called Pasminco, which was the largest zinc company in the world during the 90s, and then started becoming an entrepreneur. Bought all the data from South America from Pasminco and started with that data, and started generating projects because I was in South America. Canada beckoned, not Australia, because the Australians very myopic, especially back then, about where you'd invest, and where South America. So the Canadians are much more open-minded, and the North American market I've found is very much more open-minded. And then that took me all around Europe, and a lot of time in Europe and Sweden and Finland especially, and 7 or 8 deals later in the Canadian markets, and lots of discoveries and world-class discoveries. COVID brought me back home. I wasn't able to travel, and I bought back into some projects that I'd owned 20 years earlier to form Southern Cross, and put them into a Canadian company called Mawson, which you mentioned. And then a couple of years ago, we spun them out onto the ASX, so my first ASX deal. And here we are, with $15 million EV 2 and a bit years ago, and now it's $500 million on the back of a fantastic discovery, overlooked by my little school that I went to, in a little room of 10 kids or less, looking into that over the project. So it's sort of come back to where it all started. And, in my mid-50s, I'm happy to be exploring in my backyard. In my 30s, I would have dismissed it out of hand because I wanted to travel the world, which I did.
Yeah. Obviously, when people think of Australian mining, they tend to think of WA, with obviously the iron ore. If you look at Queensland, there's obviously a lot of coal. There's at the top of Queensland, you got some in Mount Isa, some metalliferous mines. But not many people talk about the goldfields in Victoria. I just wonder if you can just give us a little bit of an overview of, I suppose, Victoria as a mining state.
Yeah, so it's supersonic in the past. It built the expansion of the English Empire in the 1800s. So it founded that expansion of the English through various parts of the world. It built Australia basically off the back of those gold rush times from the 1850s, 1851 onwards, 80 million ounces. So one of the biggest, it vied with California in those gold rush times as the biggest producer. So Victoria was supersonic, and right up until about World War One, so 1851 to 1915. The only mines that were kept open during the war, because all the men went to war, were the mines that had antimony, and we can talk a bit about antimony perhaps, but so it's always been the second most important metal after gold here in Victoria, and antimony was kept open by your government, actually, the mines from the Imperial Munitions Act from the UK there, because antimony is a critical defence material, goes into the primers of any munition. So for the same reason that it's become critical today, we saw last week China banning all exports to outside of China for antimony. So it's the same argument. So that 1915, and then Western Australia became of more interest. It was less populated, and mining was lost to Victoria for the most part. It was about 1930s or 40s or 50s, something like that Western Australia started to produce a little bit more than Victoria. So it took a while for many years, for like 100 years from the first gold rush, for Western Australia to become it. And then the restarts of Victoria were looked at from the 70s onwards, and your listeners may know of Ballarat and Bendigo. And they were really tough. And in simple terms, if you have a plum pudding and you've got the sultanas in the plum pudding, that's what Bendigo and Ballarat are for the gold. The gold's like sultanas. So you've got nuggets of gold or sultanas of gold. So when you drill it and you hit a sultana, it's bang, but you often don't hit that sultana when you drill the plum pudding. So very hard for modern day reconcilable mines, and billions of dollars was lost. So not only did Victoria become more populated, it became on the nose technically because there was lots of failures. Now only 8 years ago, 2016, maybe a couple of years before, but really 2016, a mine called Fosterville, which was a really hard mine, owned by Canadians, but an hour away and a half away from me. I'm sitting here in Melbourne. started to find at depth, had been operating for 20 years, supersonic grades and these bonanza hits. And a very famous financier in Canada, a guy called Eric Sprott, who I'm sure you've heard of, perhaps came and noticed the very high grades. Canadians love high grades. Was owned by a Canadian company, a number of Canadian companies before it. So it was Canadian financing that had kept Fosterville going. Eric became involved with Kirkland Lake Gold, and then Fosterville in 3 or 4 years became the highest grade gold mine on earth. It became the lowest ASIC, so all in sustaining cost. It was a top 10 producer. It produced up to 600,000 ounces a year. That was for 4 of the last 7 or 8 years. It became that. It was making $1 million a day, $10 billion of market cap appreciation over that time. And so it was just amazing. And it wasn't the Sultana style. It was like the flour. So it was geologically different, like the flour and the plum pudding. So you could drill it anywhere and you have consistency, but it was incredibly wealthy. And that was Canadian money that benefited from all that. So it wasn't Australian money, and it was lost to Australians because of that bias, I suppose, against everything in Victoria is nuggety and it's too hard to permit, and we're from Western Australia and we want to succeed from the east anyhow. So the Canadians essentially took the opportunity. So that's when in 2019-20 there was a lot of money that came into Victoria for this new style of gold, this Fosterville lookalike, and we were one of those players. I had the benefit of owning many of these projects 20 years ago, so I bought back into many of the projects I owned and had to suck it up, and I failed 20 years ago, but Fosterville wasn't known right at that time to be that economic and that economically wonderful thing. Anyhow, we got 3 of the 9 historic fields of this style. We call it epizonal as geologists, and you've got to go deep into these systems. So about 500 meters, they change from pretty average deposits to supersonic, and that's what happened at Fosterville. Sunday Creek, our project, had never really been drilled. It had 5 kilometers over. Since it was mined from the 1857, so nothing. We put 60 kilometres into it over the last couple of years, so we put a lot more drilling. We went deep, and we found another one of these systems that is arguably, and it's not the best gold discovery on Earth at the moment. So it's one of the top discoveries on any discovery measure in terms of hit rate and high grades. And I urge your listeners to look into it a bit more if there's any interest. But that's Victoria today. So what made Victoria famous in the past is not what's made it famous over the last 7 or 8 years. And there's green shoots around permitting. There's 5 mines here in Victoria today, and we're producing more gold than we have for 100 years because of that change at Fosterville, and then now the discoveries that are starting to be made, which we're leading. So there's perhaps a longer discussion.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's interesting here, and I'm sure our audience will enjoy listening to the history of Victoria. Why don't you can just give us a snapshot of Southern Cross?
Yeah, so we founded this company out of Mawson a couple of years ago, May 2022. We've got 5 drill rigs going today. We've drilled. We've got an exploration target from January. Half a year ago, that was 1 to 1.6 million ounces at 7 to 10 grams gold equivalent. The equivalent comes from 20% and antimony with the gold. We're heading towards what looks like 3 million ounces. We've got a 10-kilometre long trend. We've only tested 3% of that. We're well financed. We put $30 million in the ground, and a lot more is coming up. We're going to double the meters over the next year. So we're on a real runway. You don't find many of these discoveries very often. We've got some of the best investors globally here in the world, and eventually because we're merging the companies back together with Mawson, we can talk a bit about that, but we'll have over 50% institutional and high net worth, and some, Pierre Lassonde, who's one of the most famous value investors in the gold space, is one of our major investors, and the people around him. So it's a very well supported company, and that's just a measure of the success of what this project is. And like I said, we're custodians, and we're very lucky to be custodians of that, because you don't find these things very often, and you've got to realise you get lucky sometimes, and we created that luck. But no doubt that you never know what lies beneath, and we found a lot of gold.
Yeah. Let's talk about, obviously, Sunday Creek, your project, which is located around 60 kilometres north of, obviously, Melbourne, the city. And Melbourne has a population of over 5 million. I suppose one question is, how can you build a mine so close to, obviously, a large population like that? And what does a mine so close to a population like that look like? And how do you manage? And I suppose, how do you imagine, and maybe different to actually traditional mines, where traditional mines are, I suppose, more isolated and away from major cities?
No, it's a good question, Rob, because you think 60 kilometres from Melbourne. I could literally, I'm sort of live near the centre of Melbourne. I could be at the drill rig within an hour. So it's certainly close, but on a local level, we've got 12 properties within 2 kilometres to the north of the project, and nobody living within 10 kilometres of the south. So it's actually a little enclave. If the project was 5 kilometres further west, it would be really hard. Could be a lot of smaller farms, and you'd be dealing with tens or many more people. So it's just been long-term generational farming. We own 320 acres over the key part of the project, so we've purchased a lot of freehold land. So there's a drone footage on our website if anyone wants to have a look at a sort of 360-degree situation of the project. So it's just very fortunate where it is, and that goes to the social licensing, and I know you're going to ask me about that in a minute, so I'll refrain from that. But two very great benefits is that most mining is in the middle of nowhere, and I've spent a lot of my career in the middle of nowhere. I've loved it. That's what I've loved doing. But it's not necessarily what everybody wants to do these days, and especially younger people don't want to go and live in the middle of nowhere with perhaps the accessibility of everything these days. So we've got people commuting from Melbourne today to the project. We've got about 40 people working on the project. So if you're a mining engineer, you can send your kids to a private school in Melbourne and commute to the mine. So we'll get the very best people, number one. But what's most important is that mine waste, for example, tailings or waste rock dumps, are waste in mining because they're a relatively low value product that you can't move or ship because they're in the middle of nowhere. There's 5 quarries, including one next to us, literally within 5 or 6 kilometres on our exploration permit, between us and Melbourne. And 5 million people demands lots of rock and sand and crushed rock, etc. So you can really start to reimagine that. I've set the task for the team to see if we can build a mine with essentially zero waste. It will be like a transfer station. The rock will come out of the ground and then go to the railway siding 7 or 8 kilometres from us and be shipped north-south, into the city or further north. And that's the kind of thing that I think we need to build, right? You can't have these big footprints and just these very large waste rock dumps. And quarrying companies these days, in Europe, are many of the companies that are working here, Holcim or Hanson, they are mandated to go to 30% recyclables in over the next whatever period of time. So having mined what is termed waste, but it's actually just crushed rock that's generally just dumped. So it's a very different outcome, I think, that we can create, being so close to a capital without the impact on the local population, like you could imagine being on the outskirts of a major city.
Yeah. How can, I suppose, one of the best discoveries globally be sitting in such a mature goldfields and essentially unrolled until 4 years ago? What sort of technologies and thinking led you to sort of unravel such a discovery?
Yeah, so it was standing on the shoulders of giants, that Fosterville analogue I gave you before. So in the geological literature, we knew that Fosterville was very different. So the flour in the plum pudding was very different to the sultanas in the plum pudding. And everybody looked for the sultanas in the plum pudding and ignored this one because this one wasn't that great until that discovery in 2016-17. So the economic outcome only was understood, less than 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So we went to all the old fields that were this style, the flower style, and none of them were really looked at. They weren't that amenable for the old timers because they were more metallurgically complex. They loved the sultanas; they just crunched them up and took the nuggets. Whereas this one had a lot more sulfide and antimony, and it was more complex. So they weren't really looked at hugely in the past. And then because Fosterville's only so relatively new in terms of that economic outcome, all these things were sitting here, and they still are. I can tell you there's so many of these fields around Victoria that haven't been looked at. We've got another one that is ripe for the picking, but it's just a big distraction for us until we define over the next year or so just how big this one is becoming. So Sunday Creek is becoming. So as a geologist, and when you start to make discoveries, you realize how little you know, and then you just open your mind up and don't follow the conventional wisdom. And when you're onto something, you really go for it. And I suppose that's the benefit of getting a bit older and having people that have made money basically from discoveries that are made that allow us to go out and maybe be a bit more bigger picture thinking than what I could have done when I was earlier in my career.
So with the obviously grades and widths better than obviously most projects around, obviously this looks to be really an exciting project and too be good to be sort of true. How do you articulate the story, and I suppose how do you differentiate yourself from some of the other gold stories that have been much challenging within Victoria over the long term? And obviously an example, as you've previously mentioned, Fosterville.
Yeah, so this it does look too good to be true often because it's just bang, bang, bang. But the weight of results has certainly overcome that wall of worry. But if there's two things that people come back to us about is that, the conventional wisdom, the blinkered vision is Victoria's hard because it's the sultanas or the nuggety gold. And anyhow, if it does hang together and things in Victoria don't, how the hell do you permit it? So, that's everything we've got to demonstrate, and that's our job to de-risk these things and convince people of the reality. And it's easier in North America than it is in my backyard here because Fosterville is so well known overseas because that's where all the capital came from. That's where all the capital was. They benefited from that investment. So the geostats or the geostatistics of the deposit are easy. That's maths. And you can show that with graphs and how we model this. And if people give us 15 or 20 minutes, they get that. So that's easy to tell. The difference, the other difference about Victoria being open for business takes a little bit more. But we have some very good demonstrable cases. There's things happening here, and actually, it's a bit of a disaster. I know you know a bit about Australia, but we're broke. The Victorian government has not been that well managed over the last decade, and it's been a bit of largesse, and so we got more debt in this state than Tasmania, New South Wales, and Queensland combined. So the state does need income. So there's a very different articulation around 600 or 700 jobs that we can create, and $30 or $40 million a year of royalty income, etc. And that will only come if we have that social license, and maybe that's a good segue into that part of the project.
Yeah. As I mentioned, obviously, Victoria is not necessarily known as a mining state compared to some of the other states in Australia. How easy how difficult is it to develop a mine in Victoria? And I suppose what are people's perceptions when you share your story about developing a mine in Victoria compared and opposed to other states in Australia?
Yeah, so again, it's the vibe. So Victoria hasn't got the reputation, but nobody, if you ask, can put their finger on it because nobody's really looked for new mines for a long time. And this boom from Fosterville, where one of we are the best discovery to come since that discovery was made in that mine. So we're sort of cutting edge in terms of new discoveries, but there's a number of mineral sands projects waiting, and I suppose the only measure of a state's open for business is when mines are permitted. So we'll see those mineral sands projects. We'll see what happens with our project. There's new legislation that's come in here in the state for fast tracking key projects, and there's a new facilitating group to lead us and other key projects through the state. So they realise that they need to make it more efficient, and they put that in place. It's worked in the quarrying industry. It's bought $8 billion more rock over the last year to market because of the construction boom that's happened here. They needed that rock, and now they've replicated that model in the mining business, and we're starting to see at least one mine has had a new tailings dam permitted in a very quick time frame, quicker than most jurisdictions worldwide, just in the last week or so. And so I believe if we get the three pillars right of the local support, the municipal support, and the native title holder support for the project, that's the key pillars, and we've got to make sure that they're resilient when opposition comes, because invariably opposition comes to any mining project. And so far so good. I can say those three pillars are right. The legislation is there from the state point of view to permit these projects, and I just mentioned that. And you just got to work very hard. You've got to work very hard on minimising the footprint. And I think we mentioned off camera that we have half of our staff are female, so you've got to look and be a very modern day company. You can't look like a company from 20 or 30 years ago that mining companies were. So you've got to re-envisage how to open a mine and bring people along with it. But I think so far so good, and this is a supported project on all levels. So not long may it last, and we've got to work very hard to make sure that's the case.
Yeah. If we look at obviously community relations, how wide and I suppose how broad and even I suppose how deep do you extend this view for discovery, especially obviously being in an early stage? And what's some of the things you've done whilst obviously you've been at Southern Cross, and I suppose some of the things that you may need to improve on within the local community?
Yeah, so some of the better things, we had the native title holders, the Tangerang native title group, or the Tangerang Land and Waters Council, on site day one. So we engaged with them early on and gave them the respect and acknowledgement of their country from day one. So we've had a very good relationship over the last number of years with that group, and we hope to form voluntary agreements for the future before we're even mining with that group, and we hope that they'll come along with the project, because they are supportive of the project, and there'll be some agreement like Fosterville just made actually with their native title group only in the last month or two. So we've got a very good precedent there. We've got a community reference group, and we've got independent chair involved in that, and we've got the local municipality, so people can have a say. I think the project went very quickly. The discovery, when you make a discovery, you don't know if you're going to be there for the next month, and then we're there for 2 months and 3 months, and then all of a sudden we're there for 6 months, and we're going, goodness me, we're going to buy the freehold land that I mentioned. And so the project developed fairly quickly, so we had to run to catch up with informing the local community. We're dealing at all levels, so at the state level and the federal level, and right up through to the US now with the Department of Defense, with that Antimony piece, which is a really critical part of the story, no pun intended. So I think what keeps me up at night is to make sure that we have that resilience of all those pillars of the community, the municipality, the native title holders who understand what we're doing. They don't necessarily have to support us in every way, and they'll contribute to the project, but they're resilient. They understand the project. So when opposition comes, and it'll come from outside, because 99% of the time it does, that's seen for the ridiculousness of what it is, and the local people want it, and they know what the project is. So they're owners essentially of the project, right, in one way or another. So I think we've got more work to do on that path, but like I think I said just before, so far so good.
If we talk about the project, obviously 20% of the situ recoverable value is formed by antimony. What is exactly antimony? And also, how do you extract it? And I suppose whilst we're on the subject, perhaps you might want to comment on gold, because obviously that's probably the main commodity that you're mining, which is obviously 80% of the project, and is obviously a high grade gold discovery, which really means, I suppose, in terms of value and margins, why these projects achieve extremely high valuation, obviously compared to your peers. So yeah, I just wonder if you can comment on that.
Yeah, big question. So antimony, 20%, like you mentioned, of the project in situ value, in situ recoverable value. So it's a byproduct, but it's a meaningful byproduct. It is the most important metal you've never heard of. Essentially, is the line that many people say about antimony. It's a relatively small market. It's 180,000 tonnes. 80,000 tonnes is recycled through lead acid batteries. 100,000 tonne a year is new supply. That new supply, in terms of mines and processing, 82% is controlled by China and Russia. That 100,000 tonnes is used mainly in excuse me, sorry, I'm just shuffling around. My camera's following my head. In fire retardants. So that's the main industrial use. 20% of antimony is used in solar cells to clarify the glass, so it makes a much better clarity glass to make it much more effective. So that's where it's used mainly. But the critical nature of it is you don't have a munitions industry without antimony, and that's because it goes into and the key part is in the primer to munitions, so it burns hot. So anything that goes bang, it has antimony, but it's also used to harden lead, like it is in lead acid batteries, in bullets, and then it's used in night vision goggles and semiconductors and a lot of high tech parts of the defence industry. So 82% of our defence industry is within the hands of Russia and China today. Now, China turned off all supplies to the Western world, or outside of China, not just the Western world, last week. So they're not exporting anymore, and they control 82% of the market. So it's quite the piece now, and there's very little opportunity for supply here in Australia or anywhere else in the Western world. We do have one mine here in Australia that produces about 1.5% of the world's antimony, and all the processing power is with China. So we've got a lot of makeup to do, but our project's one of the larger projects in the Western world, and it's getting bigger, and it will be a key part of that whole recovery of that supply chain, if you like. So that's what antimony is. The gold will pay for it. It's 80%. We say the antimony will help permit it. How do you extract it? Well, it's a simple bucket chemistry. It's gravity gold and then flotation of gravity and antimony concentrate, and then that concentrate's either sent to a smelter, all of which are in China, bar a few smaller examples around the world, but the Chinese dominate that, or we need to create a hydromet, so not just burn it, we need to dissolve it in liquid, and that's a way to process it domestically. But we're in discussion with the Japanese government and some of the trading houses. They have the technology, without a doubt, to do that. We're talking to the Department of Defense in the US, and some of our peers in the US have received tens of millions and up to billions of dollars of loans for very similar projects to what we have. So it's a really, really interesting part of the project. Gold will pay for it, so we don't have to rely on the risk of the antimony price or it's not like a chemistry set. It's simple chemistry to extract it. So it's just where you do it and how you recreate a supply chain. So watch this space.
Yeah, certainly. And lastly, what's the outlook for Southern Cross over sort of the next 6 to 12 months? And is there anything else you wanted to share with our audience who are listening from obviously all over the world?
Well, for the next 6 to 12 months, we're drill, baby, drill. We're increasing our drill capacity. We put 60 kilometres into this over the last 2.5 years. We're going to put 60 kilometres into it over the next year. So we're more than doubling what we've got. Our aim is to get to 3 million ounces at 10 grams gold equivalent. If we can do that, then we've got a very, very significant project. You asked about the margins before. If we average, okay, so lots of forward-looking statements, but we've got very good evidence with lots of drilling already, and evidence above us, and we just needed to continue to depth. 10-gram dirt is worth $1,350 Australian, and what will you mine that for and process it for? It's going to create extremely high margins, maybe $1,000 a ton, but that's no economic studies. But that's where high grade projects, create extremely valuable projects and get valued at a higher margin than something that's 3 grams, that's only worth $300 rock, and then your margin's a lot tighter. So the cash flow ability, and we need mines like this because they will become better mines that you can create better legacies, you can create better outcomes for communities, you can create better environmental outcomes when you've actually got the ability with a lot of cash flow to create much safer mines, all that. So high value mines are not just wealth creation in isolation, and we see that with Fosterville in the way they've been able to benefit their employees and social outcomes. So I'm all for high value, highly profitable mines for a lot of reasons. Anything else to say? Rob, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for listening to me for 37 minutes of me talking about the history of myself and what we're doing at the moment. But it's a very exciting moment, and I'm very passionate about what I do, and I love what I do. So thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate your time and obviously sharing your story, obviously telling us about your career. And obviously the history of Southern Cross, but also the history on Victorian Goldfields, and some of the information that you provided, people may not necessarily know. So really appreciate you in sharing that. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to obviously follow the story of Southern Cross, how can they go about doing that? What social media platform channels are you guys on?
Well, we're on most. So the simple one is info@southerncrossgold.com.au if you want to email us, southerncrossgold.com.au for the website. We have a community website that you can also link on separately if you really want to go into the ESG side of things and see what we're doing. That's southerncrossgoldcommunity.com.au. We're on LinkedIn very actively. We're on Facebook, that we use that more from a community point of view. And various other platforms. YouTube have a very active program, channel there with lots of discussion around every drill result. So we try and explain what every drill press release means and what every press release means. So we're always traveling everywhere around the world. I was up in London a few weeks ago myself, talking to some of the biggest institutions up there. So you'll see where we are in the world. So come and see us if there's a show we're coming to. So, just please keep an eye on it. It's a very exciting discovery from a variety of reasons.
Yeah, certainly. And we include all those links to all the social media channels in our show notes that accompany this episode. So, Michael, all the best with the drilling program. And hopefully you'll be able to come on the podcast next year and give us an update.
Well, I hope I can absolutely say what we aimed, and you can pay a little bit of what I just said then, and we're there or beyond that. So thanks, Rob. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. It's an interesting, obviously, story that Michael just shared with us, especially with the Victorian Gold Fields and the history behind that. As always, please share this episode with people within our industry, but also people outside of our industry, because that's how we're going to improve the image of the image and branding of our industry, mining, which sometimes gets tarnished a lot. So appreciate if you can just share this episode to everyone and the podcast. So until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.